Hi, and welcome to week 5 in the Design for Life Bible study. Today we're going to look at growth and just how we change and grow over time. And we're going to look at the life of Peter. Now, Peter was like this super apostle. There's so many stories about Peter in the Gospels and the book of Acts. I mean, this guy's like larger than life. And for most of us, as we read the stories, we love Peter. And what we love about Peter is that Peter is us. Peter messes up. He falls flat on his face. He does the wrong thing. And yet in all of that, we go, hey, I can kind of relate to that guy. And so as we look at the life of Peter, we understand that he was an apostle. He was a fisherman first, and God comes along, Jesus Christ comes along, and he handpicks Peter off of fishing on his boat. He's just in the middle of a workday, and Jesus calls out to him, and he actually drops what he's doing, and he follows Jesus. So he moves from the life of a fisherman to the life of an apostle, a disciple, a follower. He's part of the 12 that Jesus hand selects. And of that 12, Peter becomes the leader. But how does he get there? So again, as we look at the life of Peter, we understand that his personality is bold and brash. He's a zealot. He's like always willing to dive in. And sometimes he jumps before he knows what he's doing. And we see that in the story of Peter walking on the water. Now, as we read in the scriptures this week, Peter is actually in a boat when Jesus comes walking on the water in the midst of some stormy weather. And the apostles see Jesus out there. They think he's a ghost. As he gets closer, they recognize that it's Jesus, and he's walking on the water, and their minds are blown. Here's Jesus, someone they've walked on the ground with many times to many places, but they've never seen him walk on water. And he's right outside of the boat walking on water. Now, mind you, Peter was a fisherman. He's been on a boat a lot. And he knows there's absolutely no way that this should be able to be possible. So Jesus is doing this miraculous walking on water moment. And all of the others in the boat are like, wow, that's amazing. But not Peter. Peter goes one step further and he goes, Lord, call me to walk on water with you. And we don't know why Peter thought that he could walk on water just because Jesus did. But he thought it, and then he said it. And Jesus invited him to get out of the boat. Peter actually climbs over the side of the boat and puts his weight on the water. Again, as a fisherman, many times, maybe since the days that he was first able to walk, he's been on water. He's been in water. He knows what happens when you step into water. You go down, and yet it holds him. And Peter begins to walk on water. And as he's walking, suddenly, he becomes afraid because he sees all the wind and the waves, and he thinks, oh my goodness, this can't be happening. It's not possible. And he begins to sink. And as he's sinking, he cries out, Lord, save me. And of course, Jesus reaches down, grabs him, and saves him. And we love the story, but it kind of illustrates the fact that I don't think Peter thought this through very well. I'm not sure why he wanted to get out of the boat. I'm not sure why it even worked, why Jesus led him. And I'm not sure why once he was walking on water, he chose to doubt. But that's Peter. He was learning. He was growing through these experiences. And God invites us to come alongside and to learn and to grow with Peter as we see the stories unfold in the scriptures. We read another story, and in this week's journey, we've read about how Peter, when he was with Jesus one day and Jesus was teaching, and he said that, he was going to have to be betrayed and handed over. And Peter called him out and he says, no, Lord, never. This could never happen to you. And Jesus actually reprimands Peter with some really harsh words. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Now, can you imagine if the Lord Jesus Christ said to you, you are like Satan to me right now? I mean, wow. This is not God saying to Peter, you are my chosen apostle. But quite the opposite. He's being relegated to the realm of fighting for the bad guy, being on Satan's side, even being called Satan. Now, why was this so? Because Peter was completely out of step with what God's will was. He wasn't following God. He was following his own crazy thoughts and desires. And again, we can all relate to this. But as he does these things, Jesus reprimands him, then he teaches him, and then he lifts him back up. And we see eventually Peter gets to a place where after Jesus has died, risen from the dead, Peter denies him 3 times. Jesus, after he rises from the dead, affirms him 3 times. And Peter goes on to be an amazing leader of the early church. In fact, at one point we see the full power of God displayed through Peter when he raises someone from the dead. You see, Peter goes from, I can't even believe I'm walking on water. He goes from, I can't believe that Jesus Christ, God in human flesh, could die and come back to life. He goes from that Peter to a Peter who has so much faith that he can speak to a dead person and say, rise up, and they rise from the dead. Look, all of us are on a progression of maturity. Life's experiences, what God's speaking into our life, the teachings that we get, all of this is helping us to grow, just like Peter grew. You aren't yet where you are going to be. That's part of the frustrating thing about maturity. We want to jump to this future place where we think we should be, yet we have to go step by step. That's how the journey works. We see that in the life of Peter. We experience it in our own life. Growth is a process that takes time. Peter always had the ability to lead, but he didn't have the maturity. That's something he acquired. You have abilities right now that are fantastic, but if you don't have the maturity to go with the ability, you won't be able to do all the things that you will yet future do. So relax. Be where you're at. Just be you. And look at the next step. How is God using the events of my life today to help me grow just a little bit? And by God's grace, you'll look back on your life 5 years, 10 years from now, and you'll see who you become. And like Peter, you'll see a transformation. I've grown. I'm no longer who I used to be.